Hello, students of Menomonee Falls High School. My name is Mr. Malum. I'm one of the science teachers here at Menomonee Falls High School. I am making a video about the ACT. As of September of 2025, the ACT has changed its format. And what we learned from studying results of students that have taken the test in the past is that if you're a little bit more familiar with the ACT and the format of the questions and the breakdown for the questions, you're more likely to do better. So that's the goal, is to break down the new format of the ACT so that you're a little bit more familiar with it and more likely to succeed when you take it. In order to do that, the first thing that I'm going to do is go to www.act.org and scroll down a little bit. At the bottom of this page, or near the bottom of the page, there's a spot that says Test Prep. And once you're on the Test Prep, if you scroll down again, you can get to where you can practice online versions of the test. Specifically, there's some short versions, and there's full-length practice tests. I'm going to click on the full-length practice test because I want to show you one of the science practice tests. There's also other here, too, that you might want to look at if you're planning on taking the ACT and you really want to do the best job possible. It pays to prepare. So there's some English, math, reading, and science. I'm going to open the science version and then go back into my presentation to show you that I did indeed show you where that little path is that I just clicked on, so that if you wanted to find those practice tests, you could just play this video back and you can see exactly what I clicked on to get to those. If I want to break down the test in terms of the basics, there's 7 passages. The 7 passages contain 40 total questions for the science section. There is a time limit to complete the test, and the time limit is 40 minutes, which means, along with reading the passages, looking at the data, looking at the graphs, looking at the charts, you have to be able to answer the 40 questions at a rate of 1 question per minute. The directions for the science test look like this. This is what I was just on when I clicked off of the screen. And the most important thing here is I want you to see this, that you are not permitted to use a calculator when you're doing the science test. And that might be really intimidating for some people to say, like, wait, I can't use a calculator. And a little bit later, I am going to show you some examples of test questions that would require the use of a calculator, but you can't use one. Also, according to the ACT, the science test does not require you to have super in-depth knowledge of science. I also took one of the practice tests that they have, and I broke it down per question for ones that do require you to know something from one of your classes. And there are subject areas where they say, well, you know, here's a question, and when you look at the question, you have to know something from a class like biology or chemistry or earth science or physics. Like, you have to have certain basic background knowledge. You can find this on the ACT website, but the things that they say that you need to know from biology are the following. I'm not going to read this to you word for word. Feel free to pause the video at any point in time and look at this in a little bit more detail. But biology, there's some topics that you do need to know. Chemistry, there are also some topics that you have to be familiar with in order to be able to answer certain questions. For example, 2 of the questions I'm going to show you are about water and charged particles. And so if you don't know something, or if you don't have some background knowledge with that, you're not going to do well on those particular questions. Earth and space, and then finally physics. You have to have basic background knowledge. So the moral of the story is, if you want to do the best possible job that you can, you would take biology, chemistry, earth science, and physics prior to doing the ACT. And then if you have those classes, you would have the background knowledge that's required to succeed when you take the ACT. So these are the questions that they focus on. There are 3 main categories. There's something called interpretation of data. And when you do an interpretation of data question, you're going to be looking at graphs, tables, charts, trying to analyze those charts and do some mathematical reasoning to develop an answer. There's also a section called scientific investigation. When you're doing that, you have to understand experiments and how experiments are set up, how you would graph the results, how you could predict additional trials. And then finally, you might have to evaluate some models or make some inferences about something that you're reading. This is where you're going to have to really, really, really understand science in order to do well on the ACT. Okay, so now that we have the types of questions that there are, this is the breakdown of how that's going to work. For interpretation of data, there's going to be about 13 to 17 questions that are on that particular topic. For scientific investigation, questions about experiments, there's going to be between 6 and 11 questions. And then when you have to do the evaluation of models, there's going to be somewhere between 8 and 13. So the biggest category is interpretation of data, which is going to be reading charts, reading graphs, and those types of questions. Earlier I did say that there are 7 passages. The 7 passages are like parts of the ACT. There's what we call 4 experiment passages. There are 2 charts and graph passages, and there is 1 conflicting viewpoints. So when you're reading the experiment passages, each one of those has 6 questions associated with it. And they could ask questions from the interpretation of data or scientific investigation or evaluation. Any of these questions could be part of one of the experiment passages. Any of these questions, although probably mostly interpretation of data, is going to relate to charts and graphs. And any of them, but probably a lot about evaluation of models, is going to be in the conflicting viewpoints question. If we look at some examples from the ACT by going back to that website that I had, I'm just going to go forward and hit the next button down here a couple of times. Maybe. There we go. And look, this is one of the ACT practice things. Right away when I look at this, I can tell that this is a charts and graphs. There's not a lot of reading, and there's only charts and graphs to do. I'm going to go forward because the charts and graphs only has 5 questions. So here's another type of passage. This one's conflicting viewpoints. When I see student 1, student 2, student 3, that's definitely conflicting viewpoints. And then there's going to be 6 questions associated with this passage. Now here's another passage, because I changed to a new screen, and I see experiment 1, experiment 2. So this is going to be an experiment passage. Keep in mind that when you're looking at experiment passages, they might say study 1, study 2, study 3. Here's another experiment passage. When I get to this one, definitely looks like charts and graphs. So there's only 2 graphs, but it's the giveaway is there's very little reading, and the other giveaway, 5 questions. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So when I click next one more time, it's going to be a new thing. This is an experiment passage. I know that because it says study 1, study 2, study 3. And if I go forward further, I'm going to get to another experiment passage, because it says experiment 1, experiment 2, experiment 3, and I think I'm almost done because this is going to get me up to question 40. And so that's a quick view of the ACT and kind of how to break it down, what it looks like. Keep in mind there's 7 passages. 4 of them are going to be experiments. 2 of them are going to be charts and graphs. 1 of them is going to be conflicting viewpoint. You might find that you like one of those types of questioning better than others. Everybody has their own personal preferences, and I would say that when you're taking the ACT, you should definitely do enough practice that you know what type you like. Like maybe you really like the charts and graphs. So when you get here, you're going to hit those right away and do those first. Maybe you're someone that really likes conflicting viewpoints. So this is the one that requires the most reading. Because it requires the most reading, I think that would be the most time consuming, so that's probably one I would do last. But that's my own personal opinion. You can do them in any order you want, any way you want. There's no penalty for getting wrong answers. The goal is you have to answer as many questions correct as you can. So at the end of the day, when they're running out of time, make sure you put something for every answer, because maybe you get one right. And that's what they look for, is how many are you getting right. They're not looking for how many are you getting wrong. So I wouldn't take the time to do this first because of the time investment that it takes to read all of that. I would choose to do some that would be less reading, and therefore I'm going to be more likely to answer more questions. But everybody has their own personal preference. Okay, in this practice test that I did want to go through and show you some that are going to require some simple math just so we can kind of make sure you understand like what the level of math is that you're going to have to show. I found 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 questions that require you to do math out of the 40 questions total. And this is one of them right here. The question here says, based on table 2, so you'd have to go down to table 2, which of the following ratios represents the type of behavior? And I'm not going to take the time to analyze the question, but the answer is 3 to 6. That's what the answer is. So when I come over here to look at the answers that I can choose from, none of them say 3 to 6. But some math reasoning would say the ratio of 3 to 6 is exactly the same ratio as 1 to 2. So the correct answer for that question happens to be 1 to 2. If I move forward to question 4, this is another one that requires simple math. In this particular one, it's asking you about green anoles and their perching height. So you got to read this data table to realize green anoles are here, and you're supposed to compare the x to the y and what the difference in perching height is. So you can zoom in on this question if you want to and make it bigger. It goes from 1.6 down to 0.9. So the difference in perching height from 1.6 down to 1.9 is 0.7. All you'd have to do is subtract the two numbers. You can use scratch paper, so if you want to, you could write that down on scratch paper and do that level of math on the scratch paper, and you'd be good. Question 27. So this is question 27, and what you're looking for is the following table lists the mass of silicone in a 50-gram sample. So over here they have percent by mass. So you do have to understand that percent happens to be out of 100. So when you're doing a percent in a math class or in any class, you do the whole multiply by 100 thing. In chemistry, when we do percent by mass, you assume that it's a 100-gram sample. So this could also be a little bit of a prior knowledge question where you either have to know something about percents or something about how to do percent by mass in chemistry. But the silicon is 10.8. And the key here is you have to recognize that they gave you a 50-gram sample. So it's exactly half the sample. And if you have exactly half of the sample, the percent would stay the same, but this table says what's the mass. So if this is the mass in 100 grams, this would be the mass in 50 grams. So you just have to take the 10.8 and divide it by 2, and then you could get your mass. So the answer to that one would be D. I think question 28 is a very similar question, where again you have to understand that this is for a 100-gram sample, and over here they gave you a 200-gram sample. So this time, instead of whacking it in half, and the question in this one is talking about magnesium, instead of cutting this in half, since you're doubling the sample size, you would have to double the percent. So you go from 0.22 to 0.44. So in question 30, what they want you to do is basically do an average. The first thing you have to understand about the question is you got to focus on study 3. So study 3 is down here, and they want to know like what is the average across all 5 types of leaves? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So I'm going to zoom in on this one a little bit so we can see it a little bit better. They want you to just do a rough average. So this one's 35, this one's a little bit above 30, this one's also 35. So 35, 32, 35, 50. So these two would probably average to be somewhere around 40. These two would probably average to be somewhere around 40. And 35 is fairly close to 40. And if you look at the numbers you have, your numbers are 10, 20, 30, 40. And so the answer here would be the average would be somewhere around 40. They're not asking you to actually like calculate the average using a calculator and getting the exact decimal point. They just want you to eyeball it. And that might be a little concerning for some people. They're like, I don't know if I'm comfortable doing that. And that's why you want to take the practice tests and do as many of those as you can. This is the last one that I found for doing any kind of simple math. And on this one, you have to look. They give you some things about the setup. Here is a basic equation right here. K equals E minus M. So if you come down here, K is equal to E minus M. So a little bit of quick rearranging of that equation would allow you to do the simple math you need to do in order to figure out the value. It says what was the value of M. So you would just simply subtract the E from both sides. So K minus E equals M. And when you do that, you could take any one of these, K minus E, it must be 2.2. K minus E, 2.2. K minus, and all of them work out to be the same. So that's the second time we've seen a problem where you'd have to do some simple subtraction. To finish up this video, I do want to go back and emphasize some prior knowledge questions. Questions that you could only answer by having previous knowledge from a certain class that you would take here at the high school. I'm going to start with question 5. Question 5 literally asks you about anoles. And the only way, if you read everything there is here, in all of this literature that's over on the left, nowhere in that literature do they tell you if an anole is an amphibian or a reptile. And the only way you're going to get the right answer to this is by knowing if it's an amphibian or a reptile. An anole happens to be a reptile, and it does absorb heat from the surroundings, which that's what it means to be an endotherm. So knowing what class an anole is, like what type of animal it is, would get you to the first part. Knowing a little bit about exothermic and endothermic would help you understand what that means. And that's, you get one from biology, and one of those topics is a chemistry topic. Question 8 is also something where you'd be required to have some previous knowledge. For question 8, you need to know a little bit about density. So this whole passage is about ice breaking off, falling into the ocean, and I think just from experience in your everyday life, you would know that ice floats. So you narrow it down to C and D right away, but then to be able to explain why. Like, why does ice float? Does ice float because it's more dense than ocean water, or does ice float because it's less dense? If the answer is D, ice is less dense than water, which would be the reason that it would float. Nowhere in any of this reading does it say that. And you might spend a lot of time sitting here looking for that, like, oh my God, where is it, where is it, where is it? And you'll never find it in the passage. Question 21 requires you to have some previous knowledge. And this is some previous knowledge about water. The only way to be able to answer this question, which in this particular case the correct answer is C, where it's not going to boil because the temperature in the incubation chamber was less than the boiling point of water. You have to know what the boiling point of water is. And if you don't know the boiling point of water, you cannot answer this question. The only way you would know the boiling point of water is from experience in your science classes. Question 24 isn't necessarily a previous science knowledge thing, but it might throw you for a loop with these numbers looking weird. That's called scientific notation, or exponential notation. And it's actually kind of almost like one of the units on the graph here. So they're just asking you to read the graph, and like 10 times 10 to the, so if you're reading this point, it would be 10 times 10 to the 7th. That's what this number is right here. So if you think it's the part of the graph between these two would be answer A. If you think the answer is between these two, that would be answer B, and so on. So it's not so much a science knowledge thing as it is they threw something there that you might not be familiar with, and that's the point of it, is to see if you can get through that. And then lastly, the last question that I have that would focus on any prior science knowledge is question 37. They're focused on the electron, and they're saying that it's moving towards this. Well, actually the arrows are pointing towards it, so you know right away it's A or B, right? And then you'd have to answer why. And again, nowhere in the passage does it tell you that an electron is negatively charged. They want to know if is it positive or negatively charged. So you'd have to see, well, it's an electron and it's negatively charged, so the answer would be B. So that's what I got for the ACT breakdown video. Just try to help you get a little bit more familiar with it, let you know a little bit more about what it's about. Last piece of advice that I have, don't panic when you see units that you don't know or words that you don't know. In some cases, those are just put in there to make you stumble on If you look at the passage, look at the charts, look at the graphs, you can usually determine what the correct answer is. Thanks for watching.